Mr. Brooke cracked his knuckles and got up from his chair. His first reaction was one of exasperation. That day after day, Madame Zilensky would have the gall to sit there in his office and deluge him with her outrageous falsehoods. Mr. Brooke was intensely provoked. He walked up and down the room, then he went into his kitchenette and made himself a sardine sandwich. An hour later, as he sat before the fire, his irritation had changed to a scholarly and thoughtful wonder. What he must do, he told himself, was to regard the whole situation impersonally and look on Madame Zilensky as a doctor looks on a sick patient. Her lies were of the guileless sort. She did not dissimulate with any intention to deceive, and the untruths she told were never used to any possible advantage. That was the maddening thing. There was simply no motive behind it all. Mr. Brooke finished off the rest of the brandy, and slowly, when it was almost midnight, a further understanding came to him. The reason for the lies of Madame Zilensky was painful and plain. All her life long, Madame Zilensky had worked at the piano, teaching, and writing those beautiful and immense 12 symphonies. Day and night she had drudged and struggled and thrown her soul into her work, and there was not much of her left over for anything else. Being human, she suffered from this lack and did what she could to make up for it. If she passed the evening bent over a table in the library and later declared that she had spent that time playing cards, it was as though she had managed to do both those things. Through the lies, she lived vicariously. The lies doubled the little of her existence that was left over from work and augmented the little rag end of her personal life. Mr. Brooke looked into the fire, and the face of Madame Zilensky was in his mind, a severe face with dark, weary eyes and delicately disciplined mouth. He was conscious of a warmth in his chest and a feeling of pity, protectiveness, and dreadful understanding. For a while, he was in a state of lovely confusion. Later on, he brushed his teeth and got into his pajamas. He must be practical. What did this clear up? That French, the Pole with the piccolo, Baghdad, and the children, Sigmund, Boris, and Sammy. Who were they? Were they really her children after all? Or had she simply rounded them up from somewhere? Mr. Brooke polished his spectacles and put them on the table by his bed. He must come to an immediate understanding with her. Otherwise, there would exist in the department a situation which could become most problematical. It was 2:00. He glanced out of his window and saw that the light in Madame Zilensky's workroom was still on. Mr. Brooke got into bed, made terrible faces in the dark, and tried to plan what he would say next day. Mr. Brooke was in his office by 8:00. He sat hunched up behind his desk, ready to trap Madame Zilensky as she passed down the corridor. He did not have to wait long, and as soon as he heard her footsteps, he called out her name. Madame Zilensky stood in the doorway. She looked vague and jaded. "How are you? I had such a fine night's rest," she said. "Pray be seated, if you please," said Mr. Brooke. "I would like a word with you." Madame Zilensky put aside her portfolio and leaned back wearily in the armchair across from him. "Yes?" she asked. "Yesterday, you spoke to me as I was walking across the campus," he said slowly. "And if I am not mistaken, I believe you said something about a pastry shop and the King of Finland. Is that correct?" Madame Zilensky turned her head to one side and stared retrospectively at a corner of the windowsill. "Something about a pastry shop," he repeated. Her tired face brightened. "Ah, but of course," she said eagerly. "I told you about the time I was standing in front of this shop and the King of Finland—" "Madame Zilensky!" Mr. Brooke cried. "There is no King of Finland." Madame Zilensky looked absolutely blank. Then, after an instant, she started off again. "I was standing in front of Vian's patisserie when I turned away from the cakes and suddenly saw the King of Finland—" "Madame Zilensky, I just told you that there is no King of Finland." "In Helsingfors," she started off again desperately, and again he let her get as far as the king, and then no farther. "Finland is a democracy," he said. "You could not possibly have seen the King of Finland. Therefore, what you have just said is an untruth, a pure untruth." Never afterwards could Mr. Brooke forget the face of Madame Zilensky at that moment. In her eyes there was astonishment, dismay, and a sort of cornered horror. She had the look of one who watches his whole interior world split open and disintegrate. "It is a pity," said Mr. Brooke with real sympathy. But Madame Zilensky pulled herself together. She raised her chin and said coldly, "I am a Finn." "That I do not question," answered Mr. Brooke. On second thought, he did question it a little. "I was born in Finland and I am a Finnish citizen." "That may very well be," said Mr. Brooke in a rising voice. "In the war," she continued passionately, "I rode a motorcycle and was a messenger." "Your patriotism does not enter into it." "Just because I'm getting out the first papers—" "Madame Zilensky," said Mr. Brooke. His hands grasped the edge of the desk. "That is only an irrelevant issue. The point is that you maintained and testified that you saw, but he could not finish. Her face stopped him. She was deadly pale, and there were shadows around her mouth. Her eyes were wide open, doomed and proud. And Mr. Brooke felt suddenly like a murderer. A great commotion of feelings, understanding, remorse, and unreasonable love made him cover his face with his hands. He could not speak until this agitation in his insides quietened down, and then he said very faintly, "Yes, of course, the King of Finland. And was he nice?" An hour later, Mr. Brooke sat looking out of the window of his office. The trees along the quiet Westbridge Street were almost bare, and the grey buildings of the college had a calm, sad look. As he idly took in the familiar scene, he noticed the Drakes' old Airedale waddling along down the street. It was a thing he had watched 100 times before, so what was it that struck him as strange? Then he realized, with a kind of cold surprise, that the old dog was running along backwards. Mr. Brooke watched the Airedale until he was out of sight, then resumed his work on the cannons, which had been turned in by the class in counterpoint.